This video here, guys, is really something. This is like the Freudian slip to end all Freudian slips. I couldn't believe this when I saw it late last night. So listen to this. George W. Bush giving a speech at the George W. Bush Institute, and he says the following.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. of Ukraine.
Whoa. Guilty conscience? Guilty conscience? So he's trying to rip Putin's invasion of Ukraine. He called it wholly unjustified and brutal. But he says Iraq and not Ukraine. And it actually gets crazier. Watch this. I'm going to run it back just a touch. But listen to what he says after this line.
To launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway.
Did you hear that? He quickly goes, well, Iraq too. So he calls it a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. And he goes, no, I mean Ukraine. And then he goes, well, Iraq too. So this is like his first admission, to my knowledge, of like, yeah, what I did was horrendous. What I did was wrong. What I did was terrible. It's almost like he's admitting he's a war criminal here because he just called it wholly unjustified and brutal. Wow, that's crazy. Run this back again.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine. Iraq too. Anyway. 75.
He's saying, like, I'm 75, so, like, forgive my brain for not working, but another disturbing part of this is, like, the laughter after he says Iraq too.
To launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine. Iraq too. Anyway.
That laughter, man. That laughter is dark. That's not a joke. That's not a joke. That's like, tee-hee-hee, I'm a war criminal and a torturer. And, like, 1 million innocent people are dead because of me. Tee-hee-hee. Now, just to give everybody some context, I know you guys probably already know this, but I might have some new listeners listening right now, or some younger people who don't know all the ins and outs and the specifics of this. This is an article that I covered way back at the time when it came out in 2013, okay? It does the Iraq War by the numbers. Now, of course, it's been almost a decade since this came out, and we're still in Iraq. So the numbers now are way higher than this. But this just gives you some understanding that this is a decade into the Iraq War, because the Iraq War started in 2003. Look at just how horrendous this thing was. The Iraq War was so messy and costly that the best attempt to assess the sheer damage is through numbers. We drew from sources including various news reports, the Brookings Institute's Iraq Index, and the Cost of War Project to document money and blood spent on war. There were, as of 2013, there were 189,000 direct war deaths, which doesn't include the hundreds of thousands more that died due to war-related hardships. 4,488 U.S. service personnel killed directly. 32,223 troops injured, not including PTSD. 134,000 civilians killed directly. Again, this was about a decade ago, so it's more than this. 655,000 persons who have died in Iraq since the invasion that would not have died if the invasion had not occurred. So this is one of those things that I always run into, is like, you try to think, well, what's the casualty number in Iraq, or the civilian casualty number in Iraq, and you get estimates as low as 200,000 and estimates that are like just over 1 million. Like, that's the window that we're talking about, because it depends how you count it, but I thought this gave a more specific breakdown than anything else I've ever seen, so that's why I wanted to share it with you guys. But again, this is as of 2013. It's way worse than this now. There were 150 reporters killed, 2.8 million persons who remain either internally displaced or have fled the country. $1.7 trillion is the amount in war expenses spent by the U.S. Treasury Department as through fiscal year 2013. $5,000 was spent on the Iraq War per second. Your tax dollars hard at work if you're an American. $350,000 was the cost to deploy one American military member. $490 billion is the amount in war benefits owed to veterans. $7 trillion. People often ask me, where do I get that $7 trillion dollar number from when I talk about the cost of the Iraq War when all is said and done? That's the projected interest payments due by 2053 because the war was paid for with borrowed money. $7 trillion. Imagine what we could do with like half that money if we spent it here at home. $20 billion is the amount paid to KBR, that's Kellogg, Brown & Root, a contractor responsible for equipment and services. This is the war profiteering that we talked about. Go and watch the movie or the documentary, Iraq for Sale, The War Profiteers. Go watch that, and then your mind will be blown as to how much this thing was a money grab. How much this thing was a scam from the beginning. How much Dwight Eisenhower was right about the military-industrial complex, and how things end up ultimately getting done for profit in many respects. $3 billion, the amount of KBR payments Pentagon auditors considered questionable. And by the way, it's way more than that now. But imagine just like, poof, $3 billion gone. Geez, what happened? Tee-hee-hee, I don't know. Somebody's obviously skimming. That's beyond obvious. $60 billion, the amount paid for reconstruction, which was ruled largely a waste due to corruption and shoddy work. This is what happens when you try to quote-unquote nation build. This is what happens right here. $4 billion, the amount owed to the U.S. by Iraq before the invasion. $1.6 million, that's the number of gallons used by U.S. forces each day in Iraq. $12 billion, that's the cost per month of the war by 2008. $7 billion, the amount owed to Iraq by the U.S. after the war, mostly due to fraud. $20 billion is the annual air conditioning cost. Missing $546 million in spare parts, 190,000 guns, including 110,000 AK-47s. 40% is the increase in Iraqi oil production. Oh, would you look at that? Oh, would you look at that? We invade Iraq. There's a 40% increase in Iraqi oil production. There's $5 billion in revenue from Iraqi oil since 2003. There's $85 billion in revenue from Iraqi oil since 2011. Looks like they jacked up the oil production after our invasion. Weird. $150 billion, the amount oil companies are expected to invest in oil development over the next decade. $75 billion, the approximate amount expected to go to American subcontracting companies, largest of all, Halliburton, who has deep ties with Dick Cheney and paid him a multi-million-dollar exit bonus. And then, would you look at that? He gave them a no-bid contract and they profited off of the war. And then, of course, the biggest number of all, 0. That's the nuclear weapons of mass destruction found through a bunch of chems were discovered. So the weapons of mass destruction that they were claiming were there were not there. Wow. Okay. So there you go. This is, tee-hee-hee, this is what's so funny. And this is what the audience is laughing at. And this is what Bush is quipping about.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, anyway. 75.
Wow. There you have it. Freudian slip basically admits he's a war criminal. You know what, George? I agree with you. Putin's a war criminal, and so are you. You should both be locked up in The Hague.